All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the event. My name is Seisha. I'm the social media manager at Charis Books and More, which is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore, and also of Charis Books, which is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books. And tonight, all of us, are so excited to host Emma Copley Eisenberg for a celebration of Housemates, a novel. Two young housemates embark on a road trip to discover themselves in this sparkling novel of love, friendship, and chosen family in a fractured America. Our conversation partner tonight is Carmen Maria Machado, who is the celebrated author of the best-selling memoir In the Dream House, the graphic novel The Low, Low Woods, and the award-winning short story collection Her Body and Other Parties. And of course, it is my pleasure to introduce the person of the hour, Emma Copley Eisenberg. Emma is a queer writer of fiction and nonfiction. Her first book, The Third Rainbow Girl, The Long Life of a Double Murder in Appalachia, was named a New York Times notable book and was nominated for an Edgar Award, a Lambda Literary Award, and an Anthony Award, among other honors. Her fiction has appeared in Granta, McSweeney's, VQR, American Short Fiction, and other publications. Raised in New York City, she currently lives in Philadelphia, where she co-founded Blue Stoop, a community hub for the literary arts. Her newest novel, Housemates, is a story of youth and freedom, a glorious celebration of queer life and how love and art might save us all. I will come back at the end to close us out. I have two housekeeping things before I leave y'all. First, I wanted to remind audience to leave questions, comments, and a ton of love prayers in the chat box. There will be a session at the end of their discussion, so if you want a question answered, definitely make sure to leave it in that chat box where it's nice. One more thing, buying your book from Charis directly supports our allows putting on events like this. If you want to Housemates, we really encourage you to purchase it from us by clicking on that teal button below and ordering from our website. Thank y'all. Have a great time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Stacia. Thank you so much, Carmen, for doing this with me.
Oh my goodness, my pleasure. Thanks for having me along.
Oh my gosh, I think that we met because I wrote you a fan letter about your Law and Order story, like way, way back in the day, is my recollection. And then we like went to the Dyke March together. That was like our first friend date, I think.
God, wow, that was so long ago. Yes. It's been ages, and it's been such a pleasure to watch like you just like grow and evolve as a writer and a person, and like then seeing this book sort of as like, you know, this it's not the top, it's like just you're continuing on your journey, but like it's really cool to just see it come to life and get to experience it.
Yeah, I hope it's not the top. I hope we're going up from
No,
here.
no. It's just it's so beautiful to like watch this. I feel like it's because like I also feel like I think of you as like a Philly friend and like a Philly person, and this is just like such a quintessentially Philadelphia book that like I don't know, it feels like the culmination of something, like maybe conversations we've had, like things we've talked about, like I don't know, it feels like this manifestation of like all these ideas I feel like I've seen you kind of chewing on and returning to kind of like for ages and ages, and it's really cool to just see it like as a physical object.
Thank you. Yeah, she's arrived. It's the product of many late night chats and complaints and fetching and quelling and gossip, etc. Yeah,
Totally. Great. So just a reminder to everyone who's watching, once again, if any questions come up to you, even while the conversation is going on, please put them in the chat below, and then at the end we're gonna go through them. So like I don't know, if you got questions, just throw them in there. And then Emma, are you gonna read for us?
Yeah, let's do it. So this is a little experiment for folks, and I know my voice is a little whacked. Apologies, I was at the bar last night a little too late. But I'm gonna do a little experiment now. So the book Housemates is a lot about photography and making art, and so I'm going to read a little bit from the book as some photographs play, and it's okay. You can sort of divide your attention as you see fit. You'll kind of let the words wash over you as you get the photographs as well. So I'm going to read a little bit from Housemates. The book is about Bernie and Leah, two housemates who meet in a queer group house in West Philly. And Bernie has a professor from college whose name is Daniel Dunn. So I'm going to read you a little section about Bernie becoming a photographer and learning about photography from her professor. Sit there, Daniel Dunn said when Bernie showed up, indicating a small metal stool that lurched perilously every time Bernie shifted her weight. Great photography documents, he said. It tells the truth. It doesn't depict. It doesn't advocate. It doesn't spectate. It is neither overly generous nor overly nihilistic. It has hope, but it is not sentimental. It does not react against. It is neither inherently moral nor inherently amoral. It does not judge. It does not pity, nor does it exalt. He showed the students Alfred Stieglitz with his dark swaths of prairie sky and up-close pictures of interlacing hands. Don't do this, Daniel Dunn said. He showed them Diane Arbus, drag queens and possibly trans women with their mouths open very wide, captured from below so the camera looked up into their mouths. Don't do this either, Daniel Dunn said. He liked the work of a straight white American man named Walker Evans. He liked the work of straight white Frenchmen Eugene Atget and Henri Cartier-Bresson. He liked the work of a straight white Ukrainian man named Ouija, and that of a white American lesbian named Frances Benjamin Johnston, and that of a white gay man, minor white, and white student, a Chinese American man named Baldwin Lee. He showed the class slides of photographs by these people whom Bernie had never in her life heard of, but whose photographs nevertheless made her feel feelings. Feelings that might be best summarized as, you can do that? Something great, with some combination of your two automatic eyes and your two dumb hands. Some of the photographs were black and white, and some were color, but they were all sort of quiet, nothing showy, no great pyrotechnics, just people and places, faces and cars, and signs and street corners, and open fields. There was one in particular of a muddy motel parking lot, up against a squat swath of green lawn, the sky looking as if it had just stopped raining, but was about to rain more. Bernie interrupted. Whose picture is that? Mine, Daniel Dunn said. Whenever he stopped the car, Daniel Dunn, always dressed in black jeans, white socks, dirty sneakers, and a green canvas bucket hat, stood in the road to extract the camera bag, a dark piece of cloth, and a tripod from the back seat. Then he unzipped the camera bag and lifted the camera out and onto the tripod. From where Bernie stood, also in the road, the camera looked like two black squares the size of pieces of sandwich bread separated by black accordion folds, attached to 2 feet that connected at a right angle to a single rail. Daniel Dunn slung the dark cloth over his shoulder, picked up the whole camera tripod setup, and carried it down into the grass. He looked into one of the black squares, which seemed to be the back of the camera, a piece of glass gridded with lines. A few more times did he pick everything up again and put it down in some new place. Many, many times did he take the dark cloth from his shoulder and pull it over his head and face most of the camera, leaving only the front square of the camera uncovered. From underneath the cloth, its creases undulating like a very slow ghost, Daniel Dunn turned knobs that made parts of the camera move forward and back, then knobs that made other parts tilt up towards the sky or down to the ground, stretching the camera's accordion folds. He emerged, the cloth over his shoulder again, walked a few feet forward, held a small plastic thing that resembled an ancient cell phone up to the sky. Bernie and Daniel Dunn discovered they were from the same part of rural central Pennsylvania, just 1 county away. They knew the same gas stations and parking lots and scenic overlooks and high schools, even if they had gone to them decades apart. The land didn't change. The gas stations didn't change, not in a span as short as 40 years. Bernie found herself daydreaming and sometimes dreaming. She often fell asleep in Daniel Dunn's car as he drove them back to campus, about the movie someone would someday make about Daniel Dunn, and about her, Bernie, his androgynous and talented assistant. They were like father and son, maybe, or boy and boy. Aha, Daniel Dunn said, a fast reach down to the film bag, then a pop to the front to close the lens, the jamming in of the film holder, the slick retraction of the slide. I'm being careful not to bump the camera as I do this, or I'll have to focus all over again, he said. Then the cocking and releasing of the shutter, so slow and so fast. Quick, he said, across the road or we'll lose the light. Daniel Dunn was obsessed with losing the light, a phrase he said so much that Bernie began to fear its utterance, for it always signaled the end of the working day. Lose the light, he said, lose the picture. One day after they'd lost the light, Daniel Dunn drove Bernie to the cabin where he was raised, an hour away from the college, took her into a small freestanding shed, and showed her a pile of logs he'd recently split. You know they are ready to burn when you tap them with your finger and you no longer hear an echo, Daniel Dunn said. Try. They all sounded the same to Bernie. What % of the total love you need should you be getting from romance, do you think? Daniel Dunn asked after a long silence from his corner of logs. I don't know, Bernie said. 30? 25? That little, Daniel Dunn said. I think when I was married, I was trying to get 70, maybe 80%. That's probably too much. Definitely, Bernie said. What is it like, Daniel Dunn asked then, when you go on a date with another girl? Bernie had said nothing to Daniel Dunn about being queer, but it was true. She had just been taken out for burritos by a tall women's field hockey player with a wide, pale mouth and had plans for more. Depends on the girl, Bernie said. Daniel Dunn laughed then, a boyish snicker that made him cover his mouth, and Bernie was filled with a feeling so large and good it knocked all the thinking out of her. To make him laugh. We like to think that all teaching is basically the same. Algebra, world history, psychology, photography. Someone has knowledge and someone else doesn't. Someone is paid and someone else pays. But it is not. The teaching of art is a particular thing with a particular ability to give life and to inflict damage. This is not about an older artist who destroys the career of a promising young female student with his weakness and lust. This is instead about what it means to have been taught what constitutes good art by someone who does not believe in your full humanity. And it is about what you do with that experience forever once you have lived it. In short, there may be people who go to algebra who learn how to live, but I don't know any of them. Thank you. We'll stop there.
That was wonderful. And you ended with a paragraph that I underlined fiercely in my copy of the book and that I think put on Instagram stories and was just really moved and floored and sort of undone by. And I want to smaller, but I feel like can we just talk about the teaching of art and like what that looks like and the vulnerability of that, both from like a teacher's perspective and also a student's perspective, and I don't know, like kind of what brought that theme into the novel, and yeah, sort of what you were sort of trying to sort of chew on or unpack with that
totally. I know you posted like fuck me up and I was like, I will, Carmen, I will. I feel like I'm very interested in the teaching of art. It's so weird that we do this, right? Like I think there is a way that we expect again, like trying to articulate in that paragraph, like we expect the teaching of art to be like other kinds of teaching, and it's just not. And I think it has this really, this really particular power. And when we say sort of power, I think there's like this sort of easy, flattening idea what we mean by sort of like power imbalance. And again, there's this very familiar story of like older white dude, younger woman, whether queer or straight. And I was really interested in particular about the ways that like teachers specifically of art have of inflicting damage that are not explicitly sexual. So Bernie has this professor, there's some boundary crossing elements there. You can sort of start to get it in the excerpt, but he doesn't assault her. He does do creepy things to other people who are not her. And I was really interested in this idea of like, what other ways do we have as a culture to talk about like what's haunting and difficult and also important about being taught by someone who, doesn't think of you as a full person. I think that's its own kind of just mindfuck. Like there's just I think that kind of being told, I had a professor in grad school that was like, certain kinds of writing are not interesting. He just said that unequivocally. Like writing about being a parent is not interesting. Writing about like your vagina is not interesting. And it was like all these things that were like so interesting. I was like, says who, And I think there's just this sense that stuff stays with you for a lifetime, whether it's explicitly sexual or has physical contact is not the most important part of what can do damage. And I think there's also this really interesting thing that happens between older dudes and queer people, specifically like AFAB people. And I was really fascinated by the idea of like, if you're an AFAB person who's queer, you're not sort of sexually available in the same way as like young straight women are, but there is still this kind of like charge in the air that can often come into play in the teaching of art. And then Bernie becomes a professor in her own right too. No spoilers, like you can't spoil this book. There's like no plot. So like, and I think that's really something I was mulling over too, that like when you've had these disparate experiences, some of them really powerful in a positive and important way and impactful, and some of them really damaging, how do you then figure out like what kind of teacher you want to be? It's really tough. It's so loaded.
I mean, I think it's interesting because when there are things teachers said in classrooms, I mean, in grad school, which for me was, 12 years ago at this point, and in college was way longer at this point, and that still resonate in my brain. Like I can almost hear them saying it as if they're saying it in real time. And as a teacher, I always think, what is the thing that I am sort of like saying off the cuff or like saying or trying to say that is going to like lodge in someone's brain? And it's such a scary and vulnerable place because I'm like, yeah, like I'm just, and I think also especially because like, as a teacher and also a writer, you're like, well, I can only speak to like what I do as a writer. I can say like, oh, like when I had this problem, or I faced this challenge in my work, here's how I think about it or whatever. And you're only ever going to have your own perspective. But there is something it's like you're trying to teach someone else to see. And I feel like I'm always so hyper aware or try to be hyper aware of like, also my own, like what I can't see, like what am I missing in like a piece of writing that maybe isn't working for me or whatever. And it's such a weird kind of fragile state. It's kind of wild that we do it on such a like, we teach the arts in so many ways and in so many different disciplines and like, in so many universities. And like, it is just such like an interesting, it's not just like a passing off of knowledge. It's like, how do we see, how do you show somebody how to look at something more clearly?
Totally. And it's like fascinating that you use the word see, like what can I not see or what can I see? Because like I feel like I was like literally so fascinated by that with the photography aspect in the book. So like apologies that this wasn't more clear at the top, but like the character Bernie uses a very specific kind of camera called a large format camera for any like photo nerds out there. And what I learned about the large format camera in the process of writing this book is like that a large format camera can actually see more than the human eye can see, which I find like so fascinating. And I think the characters are also really interested throughout the book in like, is it, like what's the connection between like the mechanics of seeing in the eye and then like seeing as it like gets into the brain. Like it comes up with fatness and embodiment stuff for one of the characters, Leah, where she's like, why do people hate fat people? Is it because there's something broken in our brains or in our eyes? And like that sort of translation piece is something I was really grappling with in the novel. And then like friend of the pod, our mutual friend Annie Leontis, incredible writer, interviewed me and was like, wait, so is the large format photograph like a metaphor for the novel itself? Like the novel can see more than the author can? And I was like, like how? And like, so like that also is a metaphor in there where I was like, oh wow, there's some kinds of seeing that like even I, the author, can't see. Yeah.
So I don't know if I've ever told you this, and as I was reading the novel, I actually got a photography degree and I studied large format photography. So I've never write about it before now, like in fiction. And so, I mean, it's funny because I obviously did not become a photographer. Like that was a path that like
Carmen, you can have a fourth career. Yeah.
Oh my God. So tired. But yeah, what's funny about large format photography, of course, is that so I loved it and also found it deeply stressful because everything you described is so finicky. And we had like one camera that the class would use. And so we'd have these sessions where we'd all be like trying to take the photo, and I couldn't do it because I was like, if people are waiting for me, I can't be like fussing and thinking if like people are like in line like waiting to so eventually so I would like book the studio, or I would like go in really late at night and I would like shoot like in the middle of the night like in a studio and stuff because I was like didn't want to wait. But what I found so interesting about it, and the reason I liked it so much, is because my professor, I remember explaining to us 35 millimeter film is like really distorted, and like people large format like photography, when you like for like a magazine cover, or I mean they shot things in film, but like it was because there's no distortion, and you can see all these things that you can't normally see. And it was like because the size of the camera like permits this like extra understanding and or seeing, which I just, it was just amazing to see it like in a novel. Like I was like, oh my
God. And it was so stressful. I was like really scared I was going to get a lot of that wrong. So like, correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, also the thing about large format is that when you look through the viewfinder, and I actually had a couple of events coming up, I've talked a friend of mine into bringing his large format camera to the event so that you can actually look through it. And it's like, it's upside down and flipped as well, right? So like everything is defamiliarized. And I found that also a really interesting metaphor for the novel, this idea of like going into a space where everything is defamiliarized and you can only see like the shapes. It's like they're meaning, like it's not like you look at a upside down and backwards horse and you're like, that's a horse. You're just like, here's a blob and then another blob, and I was like, this is fascinating. Yeah.
I mean, it's essentially the same thing as a, oh my God, I've now forgotten the word for it. The thing where you like in a room, make it really dark and you put a pinhole and you can actually see.
Yeah.
Like a pinhole camera, essentially. You can turn like whole rooms into pinhole cameras. And yeah, there's something about, it's like defamiliarized and it's like also like the time that's required to like be focusing and checking the light and then like with the loop and you're really close and you're like, is it in focus? And you can spend like 20 minutes getting a photo into focus and then you print it and it's like not in focus and you're just like, oh my God.
Yeah.
It's such a like fussy, and then I remember also because there are people who use those for portraits and I was like, okay, it's one thing to do with like a landscape or something, but like for the person with like a moving or like a figure, it's just sort of wild to think about. So yeah, it was just this like other path that I never took, but it was just so, I think, beautiful to see it here and got me really thinking about why I was so drawn to that camera, because that really was the camera that like really caught my attention. And I think if I'd stayed with it, that would have been where I would have, even though it was stressful, it was like just so interesting.
Love.
So
I did not know that about you. This is fascinating.
Okay, sorry, I was like camera stuff.
Oh, I love it. Yeah.
I want to talk about point of view, not just because I'm working on a thing where I'm also like trying to figure out point of view stuff, and I've been like, and then it was like wild to sort of read the novel and see the shape that it takes. So obviously it's in first person. There's a first person narrator, but like huge chunks of the novel seem to be told in like third, or it's being told by the first person narrator who is like kind of disappeared into the background. So like, can you talk a little bit about the choice for POV, like why you decided to do it that way, like not just have like an alternating third, or like what sort of the role of the narrator is in the novel?
100%. Yes. I mean, and that's very exciting. Now I want to like know more, but okay. Yes. So I'm kind of like a point of view obsessed person, like I love talking about it. I love teaching it. I love thinking about the idea of like essentially what point of view is to me, like grammar aside, it's just sort of who sees and who speaks, and with whom are we intimate. That's like what I tell my students, and that's what I tell myself. And I also went to a great talk that Rebecca Mackay gave at Breadloaf a couple years ago, where she was like, every problem I've ever had writing a novel is not something I've been able to solve by writing around the problem. I've had to make the novel about the problem, if that makes sense. I know, it's like, yeah, I know.
Okay.
Yeah, I was like, got it. Okay. And so the problem I was having with this book is that, so yes, the center like story forward moving part of the novel is about these two young queer people in West Philly who move in together in a group house and then end up going on a road trip because of the professor that we heard about earlier. And but at the same time, this book has a historical inspiration. I got into it and excited about it because of the real photographer, Bernice Abbott, and her life partner and creative partner, Elizabeth McCausland, who are both dead and historical queers. And I was like, okay, I want this book to be bigger than just a story of two contemporary queer people going on a road trip. Like, I want it to have a bigger impact, a bigger import. Like, I want it to matter on a scale that's larger than just like a sort of friendship romance scale. And I was like, I just feel like a close third that's like, I was having fun with the voice. I was like, this is fun, whatever. But it just didn't feel like it was like resonating or like expanding in the way I wanted it to. So I was like thinking about, I was like, Rebecca Mackay said, put it at the center, and I was like moving around some things and it just like wasn't working. And I'm not like that woo-woo of a person. Like my dad's a lawyer. I was raised in a very evidence-based household. But like, this was a very woo-woo thing that happened, which was like, I was like typing like one day, and I type up again, I write up against a window that like looks at a brick wall. It's not very exciting. It's West Philly row home. And I had this sensation that this force was knocking at the window from the outside. Yeah. And it was that voice. It was a first person voice that just arrived one day. And it was almost verbatim the beginning of the novel, you know, where I live now, there is no art. Like that first person voice just started knocking at the window. And I was like, who's that? And I had a sort of choice then of like, I don't think I opened the window physically, but metaphorically letting that voice in and being curious about it and being like, who is this first person, or keeping it out. And I just felt like it was not working. So what did I have to lose kind of? So I let in that first person voice and just like kept learning more and more about who she was. At first I thought maybe it was like Bernice Abbott, like the real person from beyond the grave. And I was like, am I writing like the Lovely Bones, but gay? Like, is that what's happening? And then I was like, I don't think so. And it was just this sense that like this person had specific insight into the book, or sorry, into the two characters, like that there was an older voice, a first person voice, who was trying to figure something out that mattered to her by watching these two younger queers. And as I like learned more and more about her, I was like, she has something at stake, you know, in her own mind that she needs to figure out. And it started to feel like more and more the question that she was trying to answer is like, can art save your life, I guess? And she was trying to figure that out by like watching these two young people who are grappling with that as well. Yeah.
I wonder, I also am like a very not woo-woo person, even slightly, but also there have been moments where like things have appeared almost like fully formed to me.
Really?
And the way that I think about it, I mean, Kelly Link has written a lot about this. Like she calls it like your silent partner, but like essentially your subconscious like giving you, but like you can think about it in whatever woo-woo way you want, like whether it's like, something spiritual or it's something, or it's just like your like literal unconscious or subconscious mind. But I do feel like it's weird how sometimes it just like I've had like paragraphs, phrases, things, not like full characters, but like definitely things like appear to me almost as if they had, but it's like my brain working on that subconsciously for a very long time and then finally just like spitting it out at me when it was ready, or like, what is this? I don't know. It's such a weird,
I don't know either.
Art is hard because so much of art making is like unknown to even us as we're doing it. Like it's like that process is so mysterious, and so it's like how do you even begin to like explain to somebody like how that happens? I don't know.
No, 100%. And I went to a talk that was Kelly Link and Hillary Leichter, and they were talking about nighttime logic. The like, I love the idea of like that there's something that makes sense, even though it doesn't make sense, you know? And when that narrator appeared, I was like, ooh, I think this makes a kind of sense, because I'm like, she ends up being someone who, again, has her own reasons for being interested in these two young queers. And she kind of follows them around in a little bit of a magical way. I gave myself permission to do that. And I read a couple of, I did kind of go on like a research bent of like looking for first person narrators that come in and out. It's not like I invented this. Like there's so many, Jazz, Toni Morrison's Jazz was a really helpful one, where because that book is narrated kind of by like a neighbor or like someone in the area who's watching these events unfold. American Pastoral, the Philip Roth has, you know, that super structure that's like labored, but also really cool. Even like Fleischman is in Trouble, you know, that book is narrated by a first person friend who's not directly involved in the action. Definitely like some girlies on Goodreads are like, what? I don't care. I don't like it. But I think there's a sense maybe that like I needed some additional voice that would add like those extra stakes, and someone who's lived a longer life than people in their 20s, you know? Yeah.
Well, I loved it. I thought it was such a really surprising and like wonderful gesture. And when I realized what you were doing, I got very excited. So
thank you. Yes.
Okay, so I really want, and I think we need to talk about fatness and fatness. Yeah. And you obviously had this incredible essay that just came out in the New Republic, like, was that last week?
What is time? I've been working on it so long, yeah.
And I know you have been talking about that for a long time, and we have talked about this extensively, just fat phobia in fiction in general, in like the literary fiction world. And then of course you have this like gorgeous novel which has like, you know, fat bodies sort of written about beautifully, and honestly, and like also they have sex and they are desired and they desire, and like has this, it was just such a beautiful, and I'm realizing reading it, what a rare experience it is to read a novel like that, which is of course so sad. So anyway, so can you talk a little bit about, like, I don't know, like fatness in fiction, fatness in this novel, like, I don't know. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And then, yes. I mean, I'm always interested in it. And I would say, like, my body, I think I put it in the New Republic piece because I've said it to my therapist so many times. Like, my body and fatness is kind of like an air conditioner that runs in the background of my life. Like, even if I'm doing other things, the air conditioner is like kind of always on. And so it's always something that I'm thinking about and contending with. And I think that I wanted to also understand, like, why. So Bernie and Leah leave West Philly and go on this road trip, and they're looking for something, right? And I was kind of like, okay, Bernie is trying to make peace with this inheritance she's gotten from her creepy photography professor. Like, what is Leah's deal? Like, why does she need to go out into the world? What is she looking for? And I feel like there's like this fascinating thing that's like queer people are also just like super fat phobic, like it's not like queers have figured it out. So there's like a lot of moments that I try to offer with the housemates. They're in this like group house, which is sort of supposed to be like this queer utopia. And still Leah's feeling like this air conditioner running in the background of just like, I feel different. I feel wrong. I feel there's a question here around my body. And can I be a fat artist? I think is like part of their struggle, like what does it mean to have a fat body and to be making art? It's only one part of Leah's sort of character arc, but I wanted to give her like 17 things to think about, and fatness is one of them, and I wanted to definitely let her be like struggling with it aloud on the page, and by the end of the book she doesn't like figure it out. Her body's not a problem to solve, so like she hasn't lost weight, obviously I would never do that by the end of the book, but neither is she like, I've reached fat acceptance and I love myself and like I'm done, like so I wanted to give her like that complicated nuanced journey, and also I wanted to let her just like have a really fucking good time on the page, have sex, be desired, like you said. I think there's also something interesting going on that I didn't fully intend, but like started exploring as it was happening, which is that like Leah is able to be like present in her body sexually in a way that's like cool and exciting to Bernie, and Bernie is kind of this like skinny little twink, but she is having trouble being like present, and she's very I would say sort of dissociated from her body. So it's not like fat people need to teach thin people things, but I noticed as I wrote them more and more together and the sort of force field that was flowing between these two characters, I was like, I think it's not just about them making art together. I think it's also about their bodies together and the ways that sexually, but also like in a human way of just like, I think there's something that Leah, like, just as like people of color understand race in a different way, in a more rich way than white people, like fat people understand embodiment, I think, in a way that is, it's a gift and it's also a burden. And Leah and Bernie are sort of both trying to figure out the answer to their own bodies in a weird way. And also they meet a lot of fat people along the way too. And I wanted to just be like, there's so many fat people in America. Fat people come in all shapes and sizes. Fat people are up to various strange and interesting activities every day on this earth. So I just had a lot of fun with it, and I tried to write the book like I wanted to read, honestly. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. Are you doing any fat writing that one might know about?
Well, it's funny because actually your novel did this thing which is how I know I'm reading a good novel, which is like I put it down multiple times because I wanted to write. Like I papered it, and then I was feeling so kind of like jazzed up that I had to like, so I actually opened up like a document that I just called etc. that's like currently still on my desktop, and it's just me writing. It was sort of inspired by especially a lot of the stuff where Leah was talking about like their family and like their like the sort of the sort of stuff about food in the family, and I just got into a real state. I was just like very worked up. It was like writing furiously and wrote like thousands of words that I don't know where they're going or what they're for, but I was just so kind of moved by it, and I think also I don't know, like it was just also making think of my own family and like writing about fatness, and I don't know, it's like for so long I was fat in a a literal way and had never really considered like the politics of fatness in any meaningful way. And I think one of the ways that my life has sort of become, and my art has like really changed in the past, even just like, I don't know, 5-7 years, is like just really thinking about like the politics of fatness and like what that means and like what that looks like also like on the page and in writing. So like, I feel like sometimes I do a thing where I sort of almost like shy away from it, even though my characters have a lot of sex. Like I feel like bodies can be a little bit, because I think for a long time I was kind of like pulling away from it a little bit, like wasn't quite sure how to describe them. But now I'm working on something which I can't really, I don't know, whatever, who knows? It'll exist probably in 25 years, but I'm working on something, and I was like, I am going to actively make my protagonist fat. Like, I feel like I haven't really thought about it in a really active way, because I also write first person almost exclusively, but this new book that I'm working on is in third person. So there's also like, I'm just also thinking about point of view and bodies. Yeah. So
that's really helpful. And like, it also makes me think a lot, like, I'd be curious, like how you navigate this, or I know we have some other amazing writers in the room who are also fat. Like I had to describe Leah's body because it is in third person. And so I described her as like big a lot. And I described her as beautiful and sexy. And I looked at the details of her freckles and her arms. And I did describe like the like sort of divot that happens at the top of the arm, from like arm flesh underneath the shoulder. And I realized that like you almost never see that. You never see, besides saying the word fat or overweight, you get a lot in fiction, right? Like I fucking hate that. Like almost no one says obese except for like in medical terminology, but overweight is everywhere in American fiction. Like it irks me to the max. And I was like, but what does that mean? Like especially in third person, I was like, that doesn't visually give me any information in a way that helps me see the character. So that was one of my main goals, is like, I want the reader to really see Leah, like see her size, see her shape in a way that is real. Yeah.
Well, it sort of suggests also that like fat bodies all look the same, which like obviously they don't.
And the blob.
Also, like whenever I see movies with fat suits, which is like one of my absolute pet peeves, and I hate it and it makes me crazy, I always look at fat suits in movies and I'm like, has anyone seen a fat person's body? Like this suit looks insane. Like it doesn't look like any person's form. It's like really weird. It's like there's not working with physics. It's like really, it's because it's meant to, because also I think that this is back to this question of seeing. It's like people aren't really seeing fat bodies.
No.
And back to even your original thing about teachers and like what it means to be taught something by someone who doesn't see your full humanity. It's like people don't want to look at fat bodies because they're like, I'm not attracted to that, or it makes me uncomfortable, or it makes me think about something like thin people. And so I think there's like an inability to actually see the body. Yeah. And so as a result, like, it's like, oh, we're going to use this vague phrase that means, or the word that means nothing.
Nothing.
Yeah. And I also, I know you and I were texting about this, but like Gretchen Feltner-Martin, who wrote Manhunt, has talked, and also actually I think has a new book out today, Cuckoo.
Incredible.
Gretchen is a fat writer, and Gretchen has spoken about how she had a character in her first novel that was like a fat woman who also is like part of a romance plotline, and Gretchen was like, I'm fat. I wrote this like fat woman who has sex and is like really interesting, but people tell me that my writing is fat phobic because I describe her body, and just by the act of like describing her body, people were like, oh, that's so fat phobic. And she's like, I'm just describing what her body looks like I'm not just like, and so I think there's like this actual like break in people's minds, like thin people, about like like how you talk about the body and how we portray it artistically, or how we even like describe people or see them truly. I don't know. So it's just really incredible to see it here. But,
it's wild, right? And I think there's also this sense of like I heard for this piece that you mentioned, thank you. Like I did talk to a lot of other writers, and I found it so fascinating, similar to what you're describing, that like there were people that would say, like I tried to put in something that it's this question of like neutrality as well. Like, can't we just describe fatness as a neutral state of being? And then editors would come in and be like, oh, why do you have to make them so fat? Or why this, why that? It's as if there's a moral or character-based significance to being fat, as opposed to just a tallness or shortness or a fatness as a neutral descriptor. I find that so fascinating that there needed to be like a reason for fatness as well. And so people, this idea of like, well, why is Leah fat? And I was like, well, not sure, because I'm fat, because more than half of Americans are fat. Like, I just don't understand the need to sort of like put pressure on that as a descriptor when we don't put pressure on other kinds of descriptors. It's so weird. Yeah.
I mean, I think also people are just, I think people also like to think about fat bodies as like so unspeakable. Like, it's rude to even just like not acknowledge it. And it's like, yeah, I agree. It's like, to be like, why is this character this way? It's like, why is anybody anyway? They just, how it is. Yeah.
No, it's wild. I know. And it was really joyful. Like, it's been really incredible to see the response to Leah in particular. And also I should mention that Leah is a fat non-binary person. And so I've gotten like so many messages already. This is so sweet. Like, the book's only been out like 2 weeks, but I've gotten like so many messages from people being like, I've never seen a fat non-binary character on the page. And the way that like fatness kind of intersects with gender is like really interesting to me as well. That like there's a part where Leah talks about the fact that she's fat makes boys see her as like less of a girl in a way. And that sort of like pushes her into this like space of sort of being in between kinds of boxes of gender. That was like really interesting to think about and explore. And it's like wild that we don't see more of that in the world. I'm just like, more fat non-binary characters, please, all the time. Yeah.
It's interesting too, because in a way it's like very similar to what's happening with Bernice being like gay, where it's like Daniel Dunn can like, it's like there's this energy directed at Bernice that's like, it's sexual, but it's not sexual because she's gay. But it's like where it's like, I think that fatness also like, you're right. It like it also can degender you, or like gender you in opposite ways, or like, and like there's this way in which I remember at some point like realizing that like I had become desirable to a certain like subset of like men, like back when I was still
yes.
And it's really interesting to sort of like, in a way it was very freeing, but also there's something about like understanding that like people sort of, something with their brain is like turning off, and it can be, I guess, kind of liberating and also horrifying and also like weird, where it's like, oh, there's just something about how I exist in the world in this very neutral way that's just like, this is how my body looks, it's like whatever, but it also, how much that can shape like what people see in you, or see as the potential. I know you also talked in like your essay about how like someone was like a bookseller was like shocked that you were the author of the book. And I think that like thinking of fat people as stupid or like incapable of making beautiful things is like also a really common stereotype we don't talk about a lot.
It makes me so sad. And just this idea of, like sort of fat people can't be geniuses or something. Not that I'm saying I'm a genius, but this idea of kind of like fatness on one side and genius on the other. Like, what the fuck is that? It was so odd. And there is, I think Leah as a character in this book is also like very ambitious. I wanted to let her be like a fat, ambitious person, which is kind of interesting. Like, I would say like, we're both like ambitious writers out there in the world doing stuff. And like, I think I wanted to give that to Leah too. Just be like, she has a drive and like sort of a fire within her to make stuff and to find out who she is. And I feel like I wanted to give that to her as well. And there's a scene in the novel too where there's like a fat phobic incident. I won't like spoil it, but and Bernie has to figure out how to react to the fat phobic incident too. And it's like, it's tough to think about too, like that there's fat people out in the world and there's fat people in this restaurant where the fat phobic incident happens and they're not sure how to react either. Like, there's a way in which like fat people don't always find solidarity with each other in a way that like is really complicated too. So I wanted to like just show all these like sort of daily interactions of like embodied self like butting up against the way we act. And you can't like dissociate the body from plot. Like, body is part of plot. I feel like that's like also so important to me, that like we are not these like all human creation souls are walking out there, separate from our bodies. It's like, no, the world and the way that we interact with the world and the way that characters who they are and what they do in novels is motivated by the body. So you can't strip that back. It just frustrates me so much. Yeah.
I was just thinking about how this thing you just said about like thinking about fat people as geniuses. There was an anecdote in the most recent Shirley Jackson biography that came out like, I don't know, 7 years ago. It's great. It's a great biography. Ruth Franklin wrote it. And there's a scene in this biography where she was interviewing like someone who had known Shirley Jackson and her husband. And this woman says, just very like casually, she's like, oh, they would throw these huge parties and she would sit on the couch, and she would take up half the couch with her body. But she was so funny and so charming, and everyone liked to sit around her and listen to her talk. And I remember just like noticing that butt, which like isn't commented on in the book, but I was like, why would those things like? And she was Shirley Jackson. Like I was like, I love my my fat horror queen, but also just like she was just like, and to me, I was like, that feels like it must have been a part of her excellence, like the idea that that was part of her that like it wasn't, she didn't write beautifully despite any of that. It's like that was a part of who she was, and like that was a part of her experience and a part of her, I imagine, a part of her art. And so I like to think of that being like, like wanting to write, and people like to, one day I'll be dead and gone and people won't, but people might read a story of mine and be like, that's a fat writer. That is somebody who is like,
we have fat brains. Yeah, our brains are fat, and also like our bodies are fat and taking up that beautiful space on that couch. I love that.
Exactly. Okay, so I think we have some questions. Let me see. Okay, so Istan asks, did you learn anything new about your writing during the creation of this novel? What are you most proud of about this book, and what were the hardest or most difficult parts?
Oh, that's so many good questions. Yes, I learned that I'm obsessed with dialogue. I love dialogue. I love what dialogue can do in a novel, I think, in a way that I didn't fully understand it before. This sense not just of sort of like creating space and energy on the page, but also there's a conversation between Bernie and Leah where they kind of like confess that they both don't know what they're doing in their lives and like don't even like their friends. They both feel like they're really bad people. And there's like a way that conversation kind of was magical. It emerged in that sort of whatever we're calling it. What did you call it? Like the magic third element or nighttime logic, whatever it is, that sort of space that comes when the writing is going well. So I learned that I love dialogue. I definitely learned that novels are really hard. This is the first novel I've ever written. I had the sense very vividly of like walking through the forest, losing the way, and then having to reverse course to the last place that I felt sure about what I was doing. So I learned that's okay, I guess, and that no one really knows what a novel is. It's like this giant capacious form that can be anything, I guess. I think the hardest part was figuring out like I knew I did want to write a road trip novel because that was part of the original inspiration from the historical queers Bernice Abbott and Elizabeth McCausland. They went on this real life road trip in 1935. They left single and confused. They came back together wanting to make this project. And I was like, okay, I want this to be a road trip book. Something happens on the road. You say the things that are unsayable at home. But then I was like, ooh, like road trip novels are actually really hard to plot and structure because they're episodic. It's like you meet a person. It's like in Thelma and Louise, amazing oeuvre of like road trip filmmaking, right? Like Brad Pitt comes in and he has like a bunch of fun sex with Gina Davis and he steals her money and that's why they're broke, right? Like it's all this cause and effect stuff. Thelma and Louise is just the movie that I love so much. And so there's a sense kind of like people come into a road trip story and then they leave. And I was like, I don't think that's right. So I had to figure out all these structural ways of making a road trip work while still keeping the focus on these two characters who are just going to be in the car together. And I was like, okay, instead of like a murder, revenge, or whatever, the main like energy that has to be resolved in the road trip is the connection between Bernie and Leah. That's the thing that's going to develop over the course of the book. So yeah, figuring out what the momentum was in a road trip was tough. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. I was gonna say, someone once said to me that when you are in the middle of a novel, it should feel like you're in a big bowl of spaghetti and there's like noodles everywhere. And I was like, does feel like how it feels. I don't know.
Oh, I love that. Like just like stuff. Yeah. I was like, great, that resonates. Yeah.
So Susan asks, have either of you hesitated to write about fatness for fear it might overtake all the other complexities in your work? Saying, I had a friend who are writers in fat who didn't want to write about fatness because it felt like their writing was the one place they could turn off the air conditioner. So yeah, have you like not wanted to?
Thank you, Susan. Hi, Susan Stinson, genius writer. I I guess I've never, I mean, okay, I have written about it before. I have a short story collection that will come out 1 to 2 years, we don't know, called Fat Swim. And then I have a story, the title story in that is about a fat little girl. So I've written about fatness there, but honestly, I haven't written about it that much in fictional form besides this novel. So I think, yeah, maybe in the future, like maybe I would be like, I'm tired about it. I'm tired. Like I want to like have a body that is, where the air conditioner is less noisy or something. But for this book, it just felt so urgent and on fire that I was like, I want to turn the air conditioner up. Like what happens if you turn the air conditioner up and let the character like really listen to it? Because I think for most of my life, I was trying to turn the air conditioner down and just not think about it. But maybe in the future, yeah, I think maybe that would be like a hopeful future is that I can choose at what decibel level to put the air conditioner in any given project. Yeah. Do you have an answer for that, Carmen?
Well, I mean, with my first book, I mean, I remember when I was putting together Her Body and Other Parties, and I was going through this very deliberate process of like, because I had written a thesis for school, cut out all the bad stories I didn't like, so I had 3, and then I was adding stories to it constantly, and like, and I was sort of trying to arrive at the place where I felt like the book was done or like having a complete conversation. And I remember like right before, so 8 Bites was the last story that I added to that collection. And it's a story about, for those of you who read it, it's about a woman who has weight loss surgery and is like haunted by sort of the body that she leaves behind, or that, yeah, that, and she's like a middle-aged woman who has an adult daughter. And initially I wrote from the daughter's perspective, which is closer to my own perspective. And then it wasn't quite clicking or working. And then I put it into the mother's perspective, and suddenly everything kind of came together. But I remember like before that story existed, or when it was still kind of just an idea, I was like looking at the collection being like, what's missing? So I'm asking these questions about bodies and sex and like, womanhood and women's experience, whatever. And was like, I don't have a single story in here about fatness. Like, and I was like, that is so interesting and so strange. Like I noticed my own gesture.
Yeah.
And then I was like, okay. And then I was like, just coincidentally have been asked to write a story for an anthology that ended up not taking the story, but it was about fairy tales. And I was like, oh, Little Mermaid, she changes. I'll make it like a Little Mermaid, which actually it technically is, but most people don't realize that because the story is, I ended up kind of submerging a lot of those, and no pun intended, those elements in the story. But yeah, and then I feel like once I had done that, and I put it in, I felt like relieved. Like I was like, oh, I think I managed to like complete the circle of what I want to write about in this book. So I feel like there was a moment where I was really, I think, trying to like kind of push it out of my own way, and then was like, well, and like it feels like a missing element for me.
I love that my book like also made you think about writing more about fatness. That's so joyful.
I mean, it also made me want to write a road trip novel. I mean, it gave me like so many. This is how I know a novel is like working for me. Is like if I keep interrupting myself reading it by pausing to like write stuff down, because it's like, yeah, I just was like thinking so much, and it just, the way you wrote about it was just so beautiful, and it was catching all the other thoughts I've been having, and I was like, I do want to write this, like make this one character fat, and so it just kind of like, I don't know. So yeah, it was really helpful. Thank you. Beautiful novel. We have time for like one more question. If anyone has a question, I didn't see any others. Embodiment. If anyone has one, throw it in. Okay, I don't know. Let's see. I guess like what's next for you? What is your plan after you're done touring the book? Like you said you have Fat Swim coming out in a few years.
Yeah, thank you. I know it was supposed to yield like 2-book combo novel story collection. We sold them together. Fat Swim, it was gonna be the like novel and then story collection exactly a year later, but I honestly think that's a little fast. I get a little bit like, whoa, that person has another book out like sometimes, and I lost my dad in October, and I got behind, and life was lifing, and I just decided I wasn't gonna push it and rush it. And I have some ideas for a couple of new stories I actually want to add to that collection. Some of them are about fat. I mean, everything's about fatness because it's me and it's in my brain, but it's a lot about embodiment still I'm thinking about. And yeah, so that collection will come when it's ready, but next couple of years. And then I already have like more thoughts for another novel. Like I'm just having so much fun writing fiction again. It feels like coming home to, yeah, I guess that part of my brain that's been a little bit like submerged, or writing. There's a whole like rant in Housemates that I'm really like impressed that my editor let me keep in, that's like complaining about the sort of like nonfiction essay industrial complex, where you have to have like a thesis and an argument, and you have to know supposedly like how you're going to prove it and who you're going to talk to and all these things before you even go into the writing of it. And I'm just having so much fun like not doing that and sort of resisting, and playing around in the dark. So more fiction to come. Yeah, more spaghetti bowls to come.
I love that. I also, coming from like, I mean, I went fiction, memoir, but now I'm working on fiction again, and I'm like, no more nonfiction. Like I'm done. It's over.
We both had memoirs come out around the same time, and we were both like, this is hell. No. I mean, it's beautiful. I love that book. I love your book, but we had to do it. But yes, I'm glad to be back. Yeah.
I also feel like fiction just, there's like so much more play involved, at least for me, in fiction. And I feel like that's a part of my brain that and it's not as if like I don't have a lot of like autobiographical or essayistic stuff in my fiction. Totally. I do, obviously, because I basically wrote an essay in third person after about fatness after like I read your novel, and I was thinking of my own character, but like like it's just, I don't know, there's just so much more flexibility, and you can just sort of like do at will what you want, which just feels like to me it feels like a lot easier than having to deal with like trauma on its face, and how to like manufacture that and sell that to I don't know, at the endless maw of like the sort of nonfiction industrial complex. So
it's true. And like sometimes I think it's like it's a nice day outside and you're inside and you have to amuse yourself. And like much of Housemates was just me having fun on the page too. Like I kind of am a big believer in like, if it's delighting you and it's giving you pleasure as the writer, like hopefully it will delight and give pleasure to the reader. So I was just like, I want to write something like pleasurable, sexy party scenes, food scenes, Waffle House, Dairy Queen. It's all in there. I don't know.
Well, it's incredible. And if anyone watching this has not picked up Housemates yet, you totally should. The link is down below our faces here. And it is an incredible novel and just gorgeous and special. And I hope you get to experience it soon if you have not already. Okay. So I think, Seisha, I believe you're coming back. I'm summoning you. Yes. Oh, there she is. Thank you.
Okay, there I am. That was incredible, y'all. Thank you so much for that conversation. Chat, please give it up for our two incredible authors tonight. Again, if you haven't already bought your copy of Housemates, what are you doing? Go ahead and click that link. You know you want to. If you haven't already read it, you need to get a hold of it immediately. But that was an incredible conversation. Thank you to the audience for asking those questions. Thank you to Carmen for being an incredible conversation partner tonight. We are all set, y'all.
Thank you so much, Charis Books. We
Have
love
an
you.
amazing night. Take care.